I'm really excited for this because Clarissa has always proven to be such an excellent speaker and so insightful for things that our kids need. So without further ado, let me introduce Clarissa Constantine. She's an only child who had a tough relationship with her mom, as she alluded to earlier. And during college at University of Hartford, which is in my backyard, she began what would turn into decades-long career as a test prep coach. I used a test prep coach for my daughter, and I can highly recommend them. Clarissa has helped thousands of kids around the world navigate college and grad school admissions processes. So when you're listening to her, keep that in mind for your kids as they're getting older. She's joked that along the way, she sometimes finds herself playing the role of therapist more than tutor, because she helps kids manage the stresses of life. And any way you can get kids to manage their stress is a blessing. But no matter how many young adults she has helped, she's always longed for a closer, more intimate relationship with her own mother. Unfortunately, her mom passed away in November of 2019. So Clarissa is now driven to help other families avoid the heartache, the lost years, and the regret that she, and most likely her mom too, experienced. In addition to test prep coaching and dreaming of the way the parent-teen-tween connection can help families, she's also a certified life coach who helps teens learn concepts like goal setting, self-compassion, self-esteem, mindfulness, and growth mindsets. Today, Clarissa is going to be discussing how your juniors and seniors can rock the back-to-school process, as well as your college-bound grads. So give it up for Clarissa.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that. So yeah, I keep that information in the introduction because although I don't have kids of my own, I've absolutely had people say to me, well, you're not a parent. What the heck do you know about raising children? And quite frankly, I don't know a damn thing about raising children of my own. What I can tell you is that in my experience, not only as the teenager, but also now as a member of the village, as it were, in supporting families with teenagers, I have an interesting perspective because I have a certain remove. I don't have that intimate airport full of baggage that some people refer to in their own relationships with their own kids. And sometimes I can come at it from a perspective of like Elizabeth was saying earlier, well, let's think about it a different way. And let's not just automatically jump to the conclusions based on the behaviors that we've established, because it takes two to tango. And so we show up in our relationships one way, and we expect the others to keep the other in our relationship, whether it's our partners, whether it's the kids in our worlds, whatever, we expect them to keep showing up in the same way. And when we can step out of that, then that's where we can impact change. So I am a firm believer that I forgot this is in there. We'll come back to that. As we look through this process of helping our older high school and to whatever extent college is on the table for kids, navigate this process, I am a firm believer that the most important role that the adults in these kids' worlds can play is mentor, manager, not doer, not nagger, not what do you mean you didn't get that assignment in? And so this actually goes back to like what Elizabeth was talking about early on, is like, you know what? If your kids are going to fail, like you're not going to be there to save them every single time. The sooner that you can give them the experience of learning to fix their own difficulties, the better. But really what's important is that we're modeling for them how to do that. So I really invite you to consider that as we navigate this late high school into whatever the next step is, for many it's college, the most important aspect that we want to stay focused on is our relationship to our kids. Yes, college is an important piece for a lot of families. That is the expectation. And I totally get that we're coming at that from the perspective that our social association or our social culture is that college is the best way to get to a place where you can afford to live independently and have a comfortable, happy life financially. And I'm not going to say that finances don't matter. I'm not going to argue that college is largely a very effective way of getting to a comfortable livelihood. I am going to say, however, that if you make that the priority and you sacrifice your relationship with the kids in the long run, that's going to bring about potentially even bigger challenges. So I just wanted to kind of frame that as we go into this to say, like, I'm not saying that college and higher education and next steps aren't important, but navigating that with as intact of a relationship as we can with our teenagers as possible is going to be more important. So going back to school, well, life, quote unquote, after the pandemic, are we actually there yet? Well, we might argue not so much. I know before we had our guests join us today, Deborah, Elizabeth, and I were chatting about traveling and visiting family. And well, if I take this step to see this person in my family and we don't do this and we don't do that and we don't do the other thing, we should be safe. The reality is we're not past the pandemic yet. So the questions that Deborah was mentioning earlier, what if we go back to virtual school? What if things switch up? What if? We need to keep in mind, we're not on the other side of this yet. We are trying to get back to some sense of new normal, which frankly, if I never hear the words new normal or pivot again in my life, I will be perfectly thrilled. But the reality is we're not there yet. So what we have to keep in mind is that as excited as the adults in your world are likely to be about your kids going back to quote unquote real school, if that's happening in your geography, it is likely that we've got some apprehension on the parts of our kids. That, I mean, going back to school is nerve-wracking in the first place. Going back, quote unquote, sort of, kind of, not really post-pandemic is likely to be even more anxiety inducing. If you are in a family where you have family members who are immunocompromised and you have had to take extraordinary measures to protect your family, if you, God forbid, have lost a family member to COVID, or whatever the case is, if there is still this awareness for them that we need to be careful, but they still are so excited to go back and be with their friends, one of the most important things we need to do along this path is just keep open conversations. So we're going to come back to that in a second. If you're a family, however, where maybe you haven't had to take or haven't been able to take those same kinds of precautions, maybe you have a family you've got first responders in your family, or maybe your family is just super healthy and you haven't been overly concerned about it. One of the things I do want you to consider is, how are your kids impacted by the energy of folks around them? I hadn't even considered this until last week. One of my networking organizations went back to in-person meetings for the first time last week. We've been virtual for 1.5 years at this point. I'm an introvert. I like this. I've been teaching online for 11 years. So shifting to an online world, I was like, please come to the dark side, come to my world. I've loved it. I haven't had to commute anywhere. And then all of a sudden, I had to go back in person with 40 other people in a room who were all talking at way higher volumes than I've become accustomed to. And I was literally sitting in my chair, kind of feeling like this, like, oh crap, like the energy around me. And again, I'm an introvert. I'm very empathic. I am very sensitive to the energies around me. I literally had to almost run from the room at the end by the time I got done with it. So if you have a kiddo who is like that, who you know doesn't do well with loud volume, doesn't do well with a lot of hubbub around them, this is going to bring up other stuff for them. So we're going to talk about some of that, but be aware that it's not just the normal going back to school. It's all this other stuff that goes into it as well. And certainly this is not only applicable for our rising juniors and seniors, but certainly also with our younger kids as well, especially the middle schoolers who don't necessarily know that they're introverts or extroverts or how they're impacted by energy around them or anything. But one of the most important things I want you to remember is this. You will find I'm a huge Maya Angelou fan. Like if I could, sit down and have dinner with any amazing human being, dead or alive, it would be Maya Angelou. And I would just want to like do like the Vulcan mind meld to like take everything that she knew and like dump it in my head. We talk about this a lot in education, in sales, and I think sometimes we forget about it when we're dealing with those who are closest to us. And part of the reason that I bring this up is we said I had a less than fantastic relationship with my mom. The feeling that I had with my mom that I was never good enough. Nothing I ever did was enough. I graduated 7th in my class in high school. And you know what my mom said to me? Well, that's good, but why weren't you first? Now, I know that came from a space of her belief that I could do anything that I wanted. But the way I received it was that I wasn't good enough. And that was just an example of why I believe that our relationships with the teens in our worlds, the relationship is so much more important. So one of the most important things I invite you to do with your students across the board is to keep the dialogue open. Now, Cindy, you had said earlier that with some families that you engage with, they're like, well, but how do I say that? Right? How do I ask that question? So it's easy for me to say, just ask, which I'm going to do in a second, but I want to give you a couple of actual tactile, tangible strategies. Number one, journaling, keeping a joint journal. You write something to the teen, go tuck it under their pillow. Let them process. Don't talk about it. Don't ask about it. Just let the written word be a means of communication. The Open the Door journal is actually a journal that I created that is available for purchase and download from my website. And you can then take it to Office Depot or your local print shop and have it printed. But it's set up so that there are questions, many of them paired, where it's like, what's your favorite childhood memory? And so the parent can write about their favorite, or the parent or the adult can write about their favorite childhood memory. And then the teenager can write about their favorite childhood memory. Some of them are simple questions like that. Some of them are a little bit more probing, like, is there something that you'd like to talk to me about that you don't know how to approach with me? So it gives them just another manner of doing that. I'm also a huge fan of this card deck, the Say It With Gratitude deck. A friend of mine actually created that. And I use it at the beginning of all of my classes just to set the tone. Studies have shown that gratitude, a daily gratitude practice, absolutely changes your mental the wiring like in your brain. And so if we can start every day with a gratitude question, or end every day end every day with a gratitude question, that as a family can make a big impact. So those are less invasive, less direct, less pointed ways, to Deborah's point of like, hey, here's a simple study. Let's talk about this. If you make a habit of opening these conversations with less challenging questions, then it makes the more challenging questions easier to deal with. But here's the deal. If you think your kids aren't talking about sex, drugs, suicide, mental health, you name it, you're wrong. They are talking about it, and they are talking about it way earlier than we realize. So if you want to have a piece of the conversation and have that conversation be comfortable for your kids to come to you about, we as the adults have to take the first step in doing that, because they're not going to come to you and be like, hey, mom, my boyfriend tried to pressure me into having sex last night. They're not going to do it unless you've had a foundation of conversation. And I've had teen suicide is something that hits very close to home for me. And I've had parents ask me, well, how do I ask my kids about these topics? And literally it's just ask, but you need to find your words. So I encourage you to make notes to yourself, journal about this, write it down. Things like, how do you feel like you're handling return to school? Deborah had some great questions earlier. What do you think about finding a life coach? Or do you think that talking to somebody like a coach or a therapist, somebody completely outside of the family who is just yours to talk to, would that be helpful? Have you ever talked to your boyfriend or girlfriend about first base, second base, third base? And to Deborah's point, this is not an opportunity for you to put your interjections and your opinions in. This is giving them the space to talk to you. Have you heard any of your friends talk about hurting themselves or hurting others? And then to Elizabeth's point, shush and wait and let them process and do it in a non-face-to-face fashion. I love the nail polish on the front porch. I love going hiking. I love going for a drive. Maybe you make it a plan with your kiddos that, you know, with each of your kids, once every other week, we're going to get in the car on a Saturday morning and we're just going to go for a drive, or we're going to go get donuts, or we're going to go whatever, but that's your time with that kiddo. Have you ever thought of hurting yourself or others? If you're not asking, I promise you, they're just not going to come and volunteer this information. I cannot emphasize this enough. Listen, okay? This is something that as I look back on my relationship with my mom, the way that I ultimately can summarize our relationship, and I own my part in this as an adult, but I didn't know any differently when I was a kid. We were both so emphatic. Let me back up. I never questioned that she loved me. I never questioned that she wanted what was best for me. It was simply a disconnect that what she believed was best for me and what I believed what was best for me didn't always match. And we ended up spending so much time trying to prove to each other that we were right, that somewhere along the line, the ability to be kind fell off the table as an option. And like I said, I'll own that. But I never felt like my mom was the safe place that I could go to talk about these types of things. And I really would have liked that. And it was all about grades for me. And so again, I invite you to like ask questions and listen. One of the best questions that you can ask is like when your kids actually do open up to you, or when they come home and they're frustrated, ask them, do you need an ear or do you need an answer? Do you need an ear or do you need an answer? Because I'm a believer, like I said, I'm an empath, I'm a life coach. I believe that we each have the answers within us, but sometimes we need somebody else literally as a sounding board. Just to like, what does a board do? You throw the ball at it, it bounces back. You throw the ball back at it, it bounces back. So ways that you can, or phrases that you can use to continue the conversation or to keep the kids digging within themselves. Tell me more. Or, oh, really? That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. Or, do you mean to say, and then summarize your understanding? Or, am I understanding this correctly? And summarize it. Or, okay, hang on a second. Let me make sure that I'm understanding what you're trying to say. Because sometimes it takes them 2 or 3 or 4 times. It takes us 2 or 3 or 4 times to actually say it the way that we mean it. And by modeling this process, it's giving them the opportunity. I mean, our first drafts are never good or are never great. They're never the finished product. That's why we write, like we rewrite and we edit, but we don't do that with our verbs or with our verbalization rather. So the more that we model and we give them the space to do that, the better they will become at actually pausing and thinking their thoughts through and articulating what they really mean the first time out of the gate. Or maybe the second or third instead of the 5th or the 6th. So ask the question. I love Deborah's idea of, hey, I've got a question for you. I'd like about 10 minutes of your time. When can you give me that time? Can you give it to me now? Do you need a brain break right now? Or I'm going to be flexible after dinner between 6 and 7. Would that work better for you? And that way you're inviting them to gift you their time. And it's showing a respect of their time, just like you expected them to respect yours. So all of this is just like what I would like to offer as life advice for teenagers and helping to keep those relationships intact. That has to happen year round. But I think it's incredibly important now as we're talking about back to school. Deborah mentioned this earlier in terms of asking your kids, well, what if things don't go from, like, what if we're not in person all year long? What if we do have to revert to online? Having a conversation with them about what their expectations are about how this school year is going to go gives you a little bit of an insight into their brain. What do you think your favorite subject is going to be this year? What class are you looking forward to the most? Which teacher do you anticipate? Because keep in mind, junior, senior year, presuming they've been in the same school for 4 years, they know, like, they've heard about the personalities of the teachers. They know whether Mrs. Stitt is a witch or whether Mrs. Davis is the hardest science teacher in the building, right? So who do you expect is going to be the biggest challenge? Ask them what they expect to go well and what they expect might be more challenging. And then brainstorm other outcomes. What if it turns out that Mrs. Stitt actually isn't as overbearing as other people have thought that she might be? What if it turns out, or how do you expect that you could approach Mrs. Davis most effectively if you've heard these horrid things? Not that you would have, I'm sure, but like, what if, right? And ask them, well, what do you think the lunchroom is going to be like? Do you think kids are actually going to be social distancing? What's your plan about social distancing? And remember, ask them and then let their answers be okay, whatever they are, just let them out. One of the biggest challenges we've all faced in this last year and a half has been this concept of, like, we're not in control, folks. There is this little microbe thing that we can't even see that has taken over control of our lives. And it is terrifying, particularly because we can't even see it, right? And so if we as adults with fully formed brains, as Deborah mentioned, if we're feeling out of control, your kids are feeling out of control. So as we're navigating these conversations about expectations, what do you think it's going to be like in, walking the halls? What's the lunchroom going to look like? Are kids going to be allowed off campus for lunch? And then asking them, what aspects of this can we maintain control in? At the end of the day, really, truly, the only thing we can control is our own response to the situation. So empowering our kids to think ahead about, like, well, you can choose how to respond relative to social distancing in the classroom or in the lunchroom. How can you proactively approach that? If it's a place where we've got good weather, could you say to your friends before lunch even happens, hey, let's do a picnic outside, so that you're proposing it and you're maintaining control and able to do something proactive that gives you a sense of still doing what you believe is right. And walking through those what if situations, and how can you drive that ship? My tagline for my business is empowering parents and empowering teens. If we can empower the teens to have these forward-thinking thoughts, then they can retain more of that sense of control that they feel like they've lost. So I also really like to think about goals. First conversation I have with my test prep students: where are you now? What colleges or grad schools are you looking at? And what grades or what test scores do you need to get there? And certainly grades are an easy place to make goals, to set goals. Do you want to be first in your class? Do you want straight A's? Do you want a 3.0? But I really invite you to consider goals beyond that. What kind of physical fitness or wellness goals do your kids have? If your students aren't athletes, especially, if they are athletes, they're already getting some kind of physical activity. But if they're not, like I was the band geek. Exercise was a 4-letter word in my household. I really, looking back at it, would have loved some kind of family activity. And so helping the kiddos set their goals, but also as a family, discussing what you would like to do as a family. When do you want to travel? Where do you want to travel now that things are opening up? What kinds of other activities can we do together? Can we go volunteer once a month? What kinds of volunteer activities are we each interested in? Do we want to go do a beach cleanup? Do we want to go pack food for the homeless? Are LGBTQ conversations important to us? Can we go to a soup kitchen that offers free food to members of the LGBTQ community? All those kinds of things. Kiddos, do they want cars? Deborah was saying at 10th grade, that's, most states 15 is when we start to allow drivers permits. If the kiddos want to purchase their own car or save to go on a trip after graduation, what kind of financial goals are we setting? So when it comes to goals, you may know this acronym, a SMART goal. This is just an acronym to help us define goals that we can work toward. You want to be specific. I want to earn $5,000 to put toward a car. So they're specific, they're measurable. What kind of car do I want? Do I want a Ford Mustang? Do I want a Chevy Camaro? Whatever, will mom and dad let me have a Mustang or a Camaro? Make sure they're attainable. If your kid says, I want to earn $100,000 as a junior, I hope they already have a business going, like a YouTube channel and a lot of subscribers. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm saying $100,000, if you haven't started, may not be attainable this school year, if that's the time frame we're working within. So attainable and realistic. And again, I encourage you to do this as a family unit. We want to take 4 camping trips between now and December. So let's set the days or the weekends aside so that we can do that. If you're in a situation where maybe your kiddo is an athlete and you would like to get more activity, maybe you can actually enlist your kiddo's support and be like, hey, will you help hold me accountable to getting up and going for a run every morning? Again, that's empowering them to put them in the leadership role. So speaking about accountability, again, going back to the points that we can't do this for them. If we're talking about juniors and seniors, my friends, they're theoretically going to be on their own in 2 years. If we have not yet, and we choose not to currently start modeling for them how to structure accountability, college, presuming that's where they go next, is going to present some significant challenges for them. So when it comes to accountability, I love Deborah's idea of, hey, I'm a check-in with your teachers every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every month. But here's the thing, as the adult in the household, you gotta do it. If you fall off once, that accountability disappears. So even if it's a case of you need to go into your email and you need to auto set an email to go to each of your teachers, each of your kids' teachers every 2 weeks. Hey, Mrs. Stitt, this is, Clarissa checking in. I just want to see how Bobby Sue is doing. Can you let me know if there's anything I need to know about? Set it to go every 2 weeks. That way we know it's not on us necessarily even to remember, like use technology to your advantage. Okay. But then also have the conversation with your kiddos about how and how frequently you're going to check in with them personally. I can guarantee you, if you are breathing down their neck every day, they're going to hate it and you are going to feel like a witch. You're not going to love it. But I think it could be reasonable to say, hey, I want to set Sunday from 6 to 6:30 aside to check in with you. I want to check your grades online with you. If you have an online, like I know here in Colorado, we have Naviance. It's a pretty common system. I want to check in. I want to make sure that or I want you to check in. What assignments are missing? What big assignments have been offered to you that are 3 weeks away? That's one of the big things that changes, especially later in high school, is that it's not just here's the homework for tonight. It's you have a big project due in 3 weeks. And some teachers help kids break it down. Some teachers have like mini deadlines along the way to help them learn this process, but not every teacher does. So supporting your kiddos in that big picture can be helpful. As you do this check-in, Other questions you can ask: what feels overwhelming right now? What kind of help do you need? Or what kind of help do you see that your friends need? Because if they may not want to identify that they need the help, but they may be able to identify that their friends need the help. But that's kind of like almost a subversive way of identifying that they need it. Or if you could wave a magic wand that magically gave you the solution, what would the solution be? And really remember, you're the manager here. You're teaching them how to do these, how to incorporate these skills into their lives. So when it comes to task management and time management, Deborah already mentioned having a family calendar, which I'm a big fan of, because that way, especially if you have multiple kids, it really gives them a visual about the world does not revolve around them. You know, how many parents I've had over the years say to me, my kid told me last night that he needed me to do XYZ for tomorrow, or needed me to drive him for XYZ. Now, if your kids are driving at this point, this makes it a little bit easier because you can be like, good luck, go figure it out. Like, you've got a car, drive yourself. But when it comes to those longer types of projects, encouraging them, as Elizabeth was saying earlier, spend 15 minutes a day, or I think maybe it was Deborah, I'm getting confused. You guys gave good complimentary info. 15 minutes a day on a particular task that maybe it isn't due until Friday. One of the things that I always struggled with, and to be fair, as a business owner, I still struggle with, is estimating how long a project is going to take me. And I'm like, I've always been like, great, I can set aside 2 hours, but what if I don't finish in those 2 hours? Well, the key is setting aside those 2 hours early enough that if I do need more time, I have space to fill it in. That is a skill. We are not magically born knowing how to do that, clearly, because I still struggle with it. So giving them tools to say, hey, let's spend 15 minutes a day on each content area. And if you need more than that, then we still have room before the end of the week to fit that in. Or if you're scheduling 30 minutes a day and it turns out you only need 15, then you have 15 extra minutes to go play Minecraft or watch YouTube or have some downtime or whatever. And again, these are kinds of skills that you can start coaching your kids on younger. But man, if they don't have it by junior year, we really need to incorporate these things so that they have it when they get to college. It's really important along the way to make sure that you're praising the process, not just the end result. Like Deborah said, grades are a snapshot of here's where you are so far. Grades only tell one part of the story. And if you can look at your kiddo and go, wow, you brought your grade up from a 50% to a 75%, that is a huge gain in a short time frame. I'm really proud of the work and the effort that you put in. That not only gives them the sense of that they're good enough, but that is a key component of engendering a growth mindset in your students. If the only thing that ever gets praised is the end result, that will absolutely result in a fixed mindset. You will end up with kids who don't want to try if they don't think that they can do anything less than perfection, and they will get stuck and they will end up unhappy. So praising the process is key. If these are aspects that you don't feel overly well equipped to mentor your kids in, like I would not be overly equipped, there are folks who specialize in coaching teenagers. Certainly there are academic tutors, right? Deborah's one of them. We absolutely have academic tutors. We have life coaches. We also have folks who specialize in executive functioning to help them develop these specific kinds of skills. Now, these skills aren't only important on their individual assignments, but they're also really important with group assignments. And this, I mean, in the real world, we work in groups often. Elizabeth, Deborah, and I, we each own our own businesses, but we're working as a group here. So part of what we did was we set aside goals. What do we want to achieve? How frequently do we want to do these workshops? And when we meet, to collaborate, what are the goals of those sessions and how long are we allocating to it? I'm in a competitive singing quartet. I do this because that's the role that I fill in my quartet. responsible for setting up our rehearsal times. So we had an extra rehearsal on Wednesday, and it literally was 6:30 to 6:45 was our warm-up time. 6:45 to 7:15, we were working on this song. 7:15 to 7:30, we were working on this next piece. And so coaching your kids in group assignments of like how to manage this, how to help them set goals and set time allocations, it will help minimize, I can't promise that it will alleviate entirely, but it will help minimize the feeling of, I hate group projects because I always end up doing all the work. So, and I mean, certainly group projects get easier when kids have more mobility, but again, this is a skill that we can coach them on earlier, middle school into early high school, helping them say to their group, what are our goals for this time frame? And, how long are we meeting? And then being clear with the rest of their teammates about what each person is going to be doing by the next time that we meet. This goes back to the data that Elizabeth was talking about. It's not just about Mrs. Stitt. Nobody in our class remembers you talking about this. It gives your teens the ability to track, well, on this day, Deborah got things done on time, but Clarissa didn't. Or Clarissa got it done on this time, but Elizabeth had half of her work done, something like that. And if it gives them the ability to track, then they have that information with the entire group that they can then take to the teacher as necessary. And it helps avoid some of the difficulties of group projects that come up. So again, I'm a huge Maya Angelou fan. Going back to praising the process, doing that check-in with your kiddos, I recommend weekly to check in with them. Keep praising the process. Maya Angelou said, do the best that you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I have my own variation on that. Do what you can until you know differently or different. Then when you know different, do different. Ignore the grammatical issues there. Different and differently don't cooperate nicely. But my attitude is like, hey, what worked? What didn't? How can I adjust? And my issue with the better and best is that brings judgment in. And if there's a better way of doing things and I didn't do it that way, then that's going to tell me that I wasn't good enough. And a lot of kids grow up with that. So the more that we can say, hey, this worked, this didn't, this worked well for you, or this was comfortable, this helped you get to your goal, this didn't. How do we rearrange that? Or how do we revise that is really important. So keeping the communication open with your kiddos, helping them set goals, identifying from the beginning what your accountability check-in timeline is going to look like. And you know what? If they don't get something done, be the referee, as Deborah said. Hey, it didn't get done. What are you going to do to change that? Oh, your teacher knocks off a letter grade for every day that you're late. All right, well, you're already 2 days late, so the best you can get is a C. It is a fact. Leave it as a fact. What are you going to do about it? And you know what? If it takes them 2 more days and it ends up that they get an F on that assignment, then that's where you can circle back to the goals and say, is that activity supporting the goals that you set? And if you bring it back to the goals, it becomes very, I don't want to say business-like, but business-like, of like, you either did the job or you didn't. You're not a good person or a bad person. There is no judgment. You either got it done or you didn't, and help them reassess, reframe, get back on the horse and keep going. So if the expectation is that college is the next step for your kiddos, junior year is when things really do start kicking in. So to kind of break this down, things that are consistent, looking and exploring colleges. Certainly grades are a factor, but again, don't make them the only factor. Tests, SAT or ACT, this is an influx conversation because of the pandemic. But to the extent that the SATs and ACTs basically have 2 purposes. Number 1, for admission, which many schools have gone test optional, at least temporarily because of the pandemic. But secondly, scholarships. Now, I happen to know the University of California school system is not looking at any of these. relative to scholarships at this point because of the pandemic. They're also moving away from SATs and ACTs because they're apparently creating their own new exam. So that hasn't been announced, like what it actually is, but that's coming. Certainly sports. If your student is looking at being recruited, double check with the NCAA guidelines as to when they can start having conversations with coaches, when they can go to camps, those kinds of things. But the sports and the extracurriculars and the fun, those are what make us human. And if we do not learn to prioritize the non-academic aspects of life for our kids, they're going to turn into workaholics who only identify themselves as by what they produce. They won't have beer league hockey like my husband plays. They won't have the chorus and the quartet that I'm in, and their mental health will suffer if they don't have these other fun things going on. The brain needs downtime. The body needs expression. We need creativity. We need these other things in our worlds. Spring of junior year, Deborah and Elizabeth were already chatting about the calendars. AP exams, if your kiddos are taking AP exams, are always the first 2 weeks of May. So when you're trying to look at the calendar and the planning process, if your kiddo is taking a couple or more than a couple AP exams, I strongly recommend that you stay away from the May and June SAT, ACT. Summer after junior year is an ideal time to visit colleges. Now, the college visits, I could do an entire workshop just on college visits. They can get very costly, not just financially, but also time-wise. At the very least, go visit campuses near you. Identify what your kiddos like about the campuses and what they don't like. Summertime before senior year is also a great time to start working on their applications, at least the fundamentals, working on their application essays, and reaching out to teachers for letters of recommendation. Going into senior year, the fall is going to be very busy with college applications. The spring is still a great time to visit colleges because that's also when their college acceptances are going to start coming in. And so it's a great time to go stay a night on campus, see how it feels, see if this is really where you want to be. And then certainly graduation. If you do have any intentions of celebrating and doing a big party, plan early because caterers and canvas tents get booked up and get sold out. So plan ahead. And then certainly the summer going into college, encouraging them to have as much fun as they can and just be kids. It's really the last quote unquote summer that they're going to have, unless they choose to go into education. And even at that, they may not still have summers. Also, other things to consider just that aren't necessarily time bound. Continue teaching your kids about finances, especially if they have a part-time job. Get them saving, get them working with a financial advisor. I talked about this more in our last workshop. Summer community college classes are also a great way to keep kids engaged. They can earn college credit if they so choose, and that can lighten their load when they get to college, if that's the way that they choose to go. And travel. If your kids are like, hey, I may want to take a year off, doing a year in the Peace Corps could be really cool. For some kids, the military is a great fit because they're just not ready to go to college straight away. Volunteering, I've already mentioned, this is something that is big and important for me to do. I try to do as much of this as I can, whether it's I'm donating financially or I'm getting out and being involved in my community. And those are the big pictures that I have for your juniors and seniors that are both time bound and more philosophical. I hope that it helps a bit to, perhaps reconfigure your perspective of the role that you play in the lives of the kiddos in your world. I do have a podcast if you're interested. We just launched it. And Deborah, we still need to chat. I haven't done any new interviews since I launched because life's been a little busy with test prep this summer. But if you'd like more information, certainly I actually have interviewed Elizabeth. We've gotten that in there. She's coming up. Parent Tween University is a parent education platform that I've got. But if you've liked your time with us, we certainly would love to have you join us again. These are some offers that we had from last time. I presume they're still on the table. I didn't confirm, but they're on the recording from last time, so they're still out there. And like I said, if you are interested in joining us for our first quarter check-in, where we're going to take what we've talked about today and build on that to, how do we adjust things for first quarter? Elizabeth, Deborah, and I are going to be back on October 23rd. You can hit that up right at parent-tween-connection.com/events. It's got all the information there. And with that, I'm going to say, hey, what questions do we have, if any?
First of all, let's say thank you, Clarissa. That was a lot of information again, and
Excellent.
really good to kind of know what's the end of the journey look like.
Well, I think the end of the journey is having kids that you can have a relationship with and be friends with once they turn into adults.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, and
The beginning of the journey at the
So much fun.
yeah. So anyway, Cindy, Leah, Chloe, questions, thoughts, ideas, takeaways?
I do have one little thing I wanted to add in there. You were talking about group projects, and I had mentioned earlier about learning styles. And the thing is that if you've got a bunch of kids who have different learning styles, they don't know what to do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take the learning style inventory with your kid and then have your kids share that with the other kids, you can identify what their strengths are. So the person who is the visual learner can be the person who does some of your researching, and the person who's a kinesthetic learner can be the one who assembles your project. So you can assign your project jobs based on what the kids' strengths are, and things will go more smoothly, which
Absolutely.
is great on the job training for being an adult.
Absolutely. Cool. Any other thoughts?
It's time for us to wrap up.
Yeah.
Audience, you have been very focused, and you stuck with us to the end. Thank you. We like eat this stuff up for breakfast. Like the three of us could get on a call and like talk about this stuff for hours and hours.
Mhm.
But we really appreciate you hanging in there, and we hope you'll come back in the fall when we're kind of doing that first quarter check-in. And yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. We will get this recording out to you, and you know, definitely feel free to reach out to any of us. We'll have all of our contact information in the email. So if you've got more specific questions for us, feel free to reach out, and we hope we'll see you next time.
Thank you for being here.